Well, good afternoon, guys. Thanks for joining me. For those of you who aren't aware of CluedIn, what we do is we bring data quality and master data management capabilities natively to the Microsoft stack. And yes, that means Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Purview, things like Azure Data Factory, Azure OpenAI. That's actually about 27 different Azure services that we plug into. To be more specific, we provide these capabilities and we put it in the hands of the non-technical users. Right? So this is, we've got some pretty great engineering tools in Data Fabric, and CluedIn's really about bringing in the kind of non-technical domain experts and making them responsible for some of the data quality elements and some of the MDM capabilities as well. So then you might be asking, okay, what does data quality and MDM have to do with building a custom Copilot? I don't think it's probably a controversial idea to think that the higher the integrity of data, the higher the quality of data, the better kind of yield we should get out of any type of initiative we've built on top of that. But what makes building a custom Copilot a little bit different is that more than kind of any form factor that I've experienced before, the form factor of a Copilot, it makes it abundantly clear pretty quickly if you've got data quality issues. In that you can kind of hide data quality issues behind a beautiful business intelligence chart. It's hard to hide data quality, MDM, and data governance issues in that kind of chat-based form factor. So this is what we're going to go through today. All the kind of pillars that are necessary to make sure we can stand up custom Copilots, but then make sure we have the kind of quality and the governance driving into that as well. So fortunately, Microsoft have made it abundantly easy to build a custom Copilot. In fact, some of you might have gone to Azure AI Studio. This is ai.azure.com. And actually, the fact that the first two options there on the left-hand side of the splash screen are telling us how to build a custom Copilot, that gives you a pretty good sign that this is the tool that Microsoft meant you to use and have made it pretty easy to be able to build custom Copilots. And obviously, when I'm referring to custom Copilots, I mean some type of base model with your own data built on top of that, okay? So this being a Fabric conference, of course, there's all different ways to be able to get the data in, including, of course, loading your data in from Microsoft OneLake. So we might want to get our custom CSVs, PDF, maybe even SQL files, Word documents, PowerPoints, and we want to load it into our custom Copilot. This also supports ADLS Gen 2, it supports blob storage, and actually just for playing around, you can also just upload files and folders from your file system as well. Do make sure that you check out the documentation because there are limitations on what types of base models are available in what regions, right? So in some regions like East US 2, you're only able to get things like Llama or Mistral. If you go to something like West US 3, you get some of the GPT models and a little bit more capabilities as that base model. Speaking of documentation, in probably, I guess, one of the most hypocritical, if not ironic statement of the day, here I am talking about data quality and governance. Every single documentation page is littered with this warning, which says, please, please, please do not use this for production use cases with production data. So obviously we will ignore this completely, and we will go and upload our most sensitive data into the Copilot. For this case, I'm going to walk through the use case of building a custom Copilot with, for making better HR onboarding. Imagine you're a new employee. It would be fantastic to have a buddy there that you can answer or ask the silliest of questions to. You know, who are our customers? Who do I talk to about X, Y, and Z? All of this data is probably buried somewhere in your sources, whether that's in your HR systems. You might have employee handbooks in PDF files, and of course this Copilot, it supports all different types of file types. In fact, I have not really run into an example yet where it hasn't supported the file type that I'm wanting to put into this custom Copilot. And so once you've kind of made that data available to the Azure AI Studio, this data is available pretty much in as many Copilots as you want. So you upload the asset once, and it can be used in as many Copilots as you want. So pretty easy to do. You can do this through the UI. There is also an API that you can do to kind of more automate this as well. And this element here is really, really, really important, this little hook here. Because what this is giving me is the first sign of attribution, i.e., this is telling me in the response to your prompt, I used this file or this particular list of files to help me with that response. This is going to be really important soon when we want to kind of add a little bit more traceability and lineage to this as well. It's fantastic to know what file it came from, but I guess the journey of data, it's not always starting just here at one lake. It starts a long time before there. So we are about 5 minutes in, and that is literally how easy it is to build a Copilot, but we are together for another 55 minutes, so chances are we're not done. I guess a great way to see this is to actually take a look at what it's like to use a Copilot like this. So we've uploaded our employee data, we've uploaded our employee handbooks, we've uploaded budgets in the form of XLSX files, Excel files, and we're now going to give it a run. Now, Azure AI Studio makes it really easy to deploy your Copilot as a web app. It also allows you to deploy it from the user interface as a real-time API. And in this case, we deployed ours as a real-time API, and that allows us to use this from places like Teams. We can even use this from the Copilot that sits inside CluedIn itself. So this is, I would say, we would be remiss to be at a conference about Fabric and not have a Copilot. And in this case, our Copilot is really good at having skills around data management, right? Making it easy to build and detect data quality issues, making it easy to find if there's duplicate records. And I have these 4 control questions over on the left, and I'm going to read them out just in case it's kind of hard to see. But you can imagine as a new employee, it'd be a pretty fair question to ask what are the contact details of a particular employee. And quite confidently, the Copilot, this particular one was actually using a base model of Mistral. It comes back and it says, certainly I found the phone number for this employee. Here are 4 possible phone numbers. And this particular issue is suffering from a couple of things. Number one, there's an MDM component to this. We don't have a single view. Which phone do I call? For those of the astute in the room, 2 of these phone numbers are actually the same, so we have a data quality issue as well. What if we then ask about Martin's salary? This is a bit of a cheeky thing to ask, but it's got the same types of problems, which, because we've uploaded our HR documents, obviously Martin's salary has changed over time. I can tell you, I haven't actually put, this is some scrambled examples, so I'm not showing Martin's actual real salaries, but I think there's a bigger issue here. We shouldn't be answering questions like this in the first place. So naturally, we lack some type of governance that should have caught this earlier. This should never even made its way into the model. But it also lacks system messages. So if you've worked with the different large language models, there's user messages and there's system messages. These system messages, they last throughout the session of the context window. And what this lacks is, we should be telling this Copilot, hey, you can answer questions like this, but please don't even try to answer questions like this, right? So direct them towards actually accessing from this, something like from the HR system directly. The next example shows us that we have a little bit of a lack of context. So once again, we're missing system messages. And we're asking for our cultural values, which is a pretty fair statement for a new employee to ask. And what we're getting back is, I don't know. But we've uploaded our employee handbook, in fact, multiple versions of it. So what is going on here? This lacks context. We need to provide these Copilots and say, you are a HR onboarding Copilot. We are this company. We have this many employees. We do these types of tasks. And these are all ways that we can provide the Copilot to provide us more nuanced answers. The final example also lacks a little bit of context in that I think it would be pretty ambitious for a new employee to ask something that would hit the bottom line, i.e., how can I save costs? What we lack here is attribution, in that it's really hard to understand if this is the base model answering this, or if it's actually gone through our custom data and it's actually telling me things that are specific to my business. The lack of context is not helping this. And I would take a guess here that this is actually the base model answering this. And these are fair things. Let's be honest, this is still an amazing technology by itself. But I think we all have these pretty high ambitions and expectations. And these are some of the reasons why we might need to add a couple of more ingredients to the recipe. So let's start with data governance. Some of you have seen probably the new release of Microsoft Purview. I've had the fortune of working with the Microsoft Purview team over the last few months, and I personally love the kind of big focus they've put on some of the more offensive elements of data governance, the things that are about how do I make money out of this data, how do I manage it and add value to the data and get more value out of the data. And I think this has put a real kind of focus that data governance is not just a defensive thing. It's not just something that allows us to continue to operate as a business. That is important. Many of you in the room probably get audited. You need to show good practices around data, but the new Purview is really putting a big focus on, no, it needs to significantly help me with things like raising more revenue streams, lowering operational costs, things that hit the bottom line of any business. One of the things also at CluedIn we share with the Microsoft Purview team is this real focus of importance on bringing the business in. In that, myself being a software engineer, there's only certain things I can solve in regards to data quality. But actually, I need my business to be responsible for the end quality of the data. And I guess a good way to say it would be that I know how to work with data, but I don't know that data. It's really hard for me to, if I'm the expert on customers, it's quite easy for me to potentially look at two records and say, you would have never guessed this, but that's the same company. Or you would have never guessed this, but please do not call that number, call that number. And traditionally, this has been hard, right? Because a lot of the time we give these quite sophisticated tools, but they're probably a little bit too technical to wield. And so I think it's a fair statement to say, okay, well, we've been trying to bring in the business for years. So what's changed? And there's been subtle changes like technology's getting better, right? But that's always happening. I think the biggest chasm that's been jumped is obviously we've been handed this pretty amazing technology in the form of large language models that has helped bridge some of the gap. And one of those is to be able to have the non-technical users, the domain experts, kind of give their intent, and then that being translated to what the underlying system actually needs. A good example would be, I've seen too often that we give these tools to domain experts and then we ask them to do something like, why don't you write a regular expression to detect a bad value? And I've just lost the entire audience, right? I have been a software engineer for 18 years. I still don't know how to build regular expressions, right? And so this large language model has really helped make a bridge. And this is one of the reasons why I think right now is a real time that we can start to involve the business and make them responsible for this. And I think there's also an industry push. There seems to be this kind of innate industry push that we are moving towards federation. And this is not only being pushed by Microsoft, but also I think it's being felt in the industry. And it's this real idea of distributing the ownership. But of course, we need to make sure we meet the domain experts where they are, i.e., I want you involved because you're great at understanding our products, not because you write Python, not because you can write a regular expression, not because you write SQL, right? I want you because you can take a look at two records and know there's something wrong with it that I couldn't, but more importantly, you are the person responsible at the end of the day. Because what happens without that, IT's not responsible, no one's responsible. So it's really important we start to bring the business in. And here we start our live demonstration. So this is a great place to start. This is the new Purview experience. How many people have seen the new Purview experience and the new data products? Yeah. So for those of you who have not, most of you might be used to a data catalog where we have all the files and tables. And that's great for auditing reasons. But one of the parts I love about the new data product concept, it's this abstraction in a way over the data catalog. It's one that is focused on telling the business, see these assets here, we've actually invested from the business for someone to actually own this data, be responsible for this data, drive key metrics behind the data that are much more commercially focused instead of just, things work or they don't. So this data product concept is a really nice thing that this is kind of what we want to surface to the business. We don't want them to search for the word customer and come back with 850 results, which is often the kind of experience with a data catalog. We want them to be able to search for something and say, no, there's this very curated list of things. You can know they're actually being activated by the business. But there's a very kind of obvious issue here in that we've got this HR onboarding data product. We've got a single list of customers, which we all know that never exists in most businesses. The example here is that we've actually got employees here, employees here, employees here, and employees here. This is probably what more of you are used to. And what we really want is to be able to drive a clean and consolidated version of that data into any of our models. And that I guess you could gather this is not only useful for Copilots, this is going to be useful for business intelligence and things like this. So let me switch over to my browser. And I'm just going to also put my screen on duplicate so you can see what I'm doing. How does that look, guys? Can I zoom in? Should I zoom in? Yes, please. All right, there we go. So this is Microsoft Purview. And I'm starting here with a couple of assumptions in that, for those of you who don't know too much about Purview, it has a functionality that actively scans sources and catalogs tables, files, data pipelines, and things like this. And so by the time we're here, at least we know what assets that we actually have. Here we have a HR onboarding data product. We've marked it as a master data and reference data type of data product. There are other types here like analytical, machine learning, operational, just to name a few. And we've actually described, we put in a couple of use cases here of what this could possibly be used for. The new Purview has this nice feature where it can suggest what possible assets it might recommend for you to bring in here. And it very much uses things like the description and the use cases to help find that. In this case, I'm stuck in this situation where I have employees here and here and here, and these are some of the reasons why my original Copilot was giving me 4 different phone numbers for the same employee. And we've got data quality issues here, which means actually the answers are just not correct. So these are kind of things we're going to fix. Now, where does CluedIn come into the picture? Well, by the fact that we've marked this as a master data and reference data product, and we've published it. In fact, CluedIn is listening to this on a regular basis. So it is polling, looking for data products that are, there you go, my Australian just finally kicked in. I'm so used to saying data and I just said data. I don't know if anyone caught that. So over here, if I head into CluedIn, because I've published this asset, I'm going to go to my CluedIn interface, and here I have a HR onboarding data product, and all my assets are automatically synced in here. But what makes this interesting is that now if I dig into these assets, I'm now looking at the actual records. So I'm moving the discussion from a metadata discussion and a file and table discussion. For MDM and data quality, I need my team to actually start to look at the records. And there's a couple of things that make a kind of hopefully stand out. Number one, that job field doesn't look very healthy. People are being very creative in the way that they're entering their job title in this HR system. And I want you to pay special attention to this record here. Let me just use my zooming app. This might make it easier. So there's this lady called Lorraine, okay? She has an ID of 1, and as we go over, she has this email address that ends in a .au, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to onboard this data into the CluedIn platform, but this is the first time that you've seen these records, and I can imagine this might be the case if you're also the person that has to look after this. This is where the Copilot becomes in handy. This Copilot is somehow plumbed into the actual CluedIn application. So what it allows me to do is things like tell me about this data set. And you can imagine if I ask that straight to a ChatGPT, it's probably going to come back and say, great, give me the data and we can start talking. But you and I know that's not what we want. We're all looking at that asset and we want it to help us describe those records and that data set we're all looking at here. So what this does is it comes back and it says, listen, it looks like you're dealing with a list of employees. Also, it looks like this ID column could be used as a unique identifier. And as we go down, it even starts to do things like, hey, it looks like there's a potential data quality issue we should start to look at in this job column. It's not wrong, so let's go off and start to onboard this data. Because what we want to do when we're thinking about MDM is we want to move the discussion away from files and tables and systems and SAP and Dynamics and Workday. We want to deal in domains. We want to be talking about employees. And so here, I'm going to use the answer the Copilot gave me, and I'm going to, on the fly, create a concept called an employee. This is one of the things that make CluedIn stand out in the MDM space, is there's no need to do what you would usually do is called upfront data modeling, where before we onboard any data, we need to perfect our data model. What does an employee look like? How does it connect to households and customers and things like this? And only once you've got that model up and running can you actually start to onboard the data. CluedIn takes a very, more evolving state to this is we'll learn about the data as we go along, and I'll make it very easy to actually change this model. So we're going to create a mapping here, and this is going to change the discussion. We're moving away from a CSV file, and we're going to be dealing with employees right now. Because I chose auto mapping, it's gone ahead and done a lot of the things for me. Things like data quality rules, we can ask the large language model to go off and start to detect things like, I could probably do some email validation. This was that regular expression example before. And I could probably also lowercase the emails because they're case insensitive. So we could also build our own rules, but in this case, I'm just going to go and click Next. And here, the platform has, using the information the Copilot gave us, it said, well, listen, I think the ID is a key, and I think the email is a key. A reminder here, this is for the business to use. So as soon as we have to ask them to do things like, what's the foreign key and what's the primary key? Should this be a many-to-one, a one-to-one? You can imagine you've probably lost the initial audience, right? We want them to be experts on employees. Now, I'm going to mark this up just with a little tag called fabric, just so we can take a look at these a little bit later. And I'm going to go ahead and push this data into the platform. So here we go. So it's moving out of this staging environment, this safe space. We're going to push these guys in, and we're going to result in 10 employees coming into the platform. So if I head over and I search, I've got these nice 10 employee records here. Okay, so far so good. It hasn't been too complicated so far. Let's head back and let's take the next data asset. And notice I'm not kind of having to kind of pre-plan how's this all going to fit together. As I look at the data, I'm going to say, oh, I need to make some different decisions here. So with that in mind, let's go and onboard another of these employee assets. And remember Lorraine, she had an ID of 1, and she had an email address ending in .au. Well, I've not made this data easy on purpose. Her email address seems to end in .gov, but there seems to be another ID called person ID. And this is typically where you would go, all right, we have to stop. I need to give this back, and we need to somehow figure out all this data is going to come together. Or we might need to use some kind of more fuzzy techniques, like where the names are slightly the same and the emails are slightly the same as well. Here, I can actually ask my Copilot, I don't know if you noticed, but even the column names are very different. We had first name in the first example, we had last name, and things like this. And what I can do is I can ask my Copilot to help me with this. Can you suggest a mapping from this data set to our employee vocabulary that we just created based off the last file? And obviously what I'm wanting you to do is kind of trade semantics. Surname is last name. Now, that's not that useful, but where this becomes really useful, if you're onboarding a data set like SAP, where we've got German acronyms for all of our column names, and this trades that semantics and does extremely well. So here you can see it suggested, potentially some issues, but potentially this is some good start to help the person map the data. So let's go and map this next data set in. And obviously what we're wanting out of this exercise is I don't want 10 employees from one file, 10 from another. I just want 10 employees that have merged all those records together. And you can see it's being kind of smart here by saying, listen, I'm going to automatically map this to this guy, automatically map this to this guy, but there's these new columns that I haven't seen before. Okay, that's fine. We're just going to update the actual model to take in those new records. Notice we don't have to go back to IT to go off and then say, hey, can you give me the new fields, because I've got some new fields to land into that end table. So once again, I'm just going to go here, and we're going to detect, okay, it looks like it's automatically picked up that the person ID does look unique. It also seems like the email's unique. So let's also tag that with Fabric, both of these guys. And we're going to push that into the engine. So we're probably without any surprise, there is no way to link those two Lorraine records together. We would have to use fuzzy merging, right? That's just something that you just would not be able to pull together, which means when we search for Lorraine, this is not good. This is why we had that MDM issue, right? You can imagine if I ask this Copilot, give me the details on Lorraine, it's probably going to say, which one? There's multiple. So this is not good. So now we're going to onboard the next data set. Let's go get the employees. And once again, another issue again. Look at Lorraine's email now. It's Yahoo. Believe it or not, this is how most companies' data is, right? And traditionally, this has been something, if you're an engineer or an IT in the room, this gets handed back to you to go and fix. And that's great because you have these capabilities, but the business needs to be responsible for these types of challenges. So once again, I could ask my Copilot to help, but I'm just going to use the inbuilt auto mapping, and it's going to do a pretty good job anyway. So we're going to go create. I'm going to edit this guy. I'm just going to change this guy to be mapped to the first name. And obviously, I'm doing this because I don't want a column called first and a column called first name. I want a consolidated, in a way, structure that I'm wanting to build here. The final thing I'll do is I'll just add a mapping to last name. Let's go to our next section. And it should have automatically picked up. I've detected the ID, I've detected the email, and I've detected the person ID. So obviously, what this is doing is it's going to triangulate these records. Notice at no point I'm actually telling the system how to connect the records. I'm just flagging identifiers, and actually it's the engine's job to figure that out. So I'm going to flag these final 3 identifiers with the Fabric tag. And we're going to push that into the engine. Notice I'm pushing it in even with those job titles still being a big issue. And this is because you're not going to fix everything before you get the data out to the business. That's quite typical in this space. We need to fix everything before we get it out. So now if we go over here and we search for Lorraine, we've got one Lorraine, not three. And actually, if we head into her golden record, we can see a history log that says, I've stitched your data together from this file, and this file, and this file. If I clicked on the email, I can actually see, well, this file had this email address, this one had this one, and this one had this one. But actually, I can explain exactly what I did here visually. This is how I stitched that data together. In fact, the lower two records stitched together because they both had this GUID-looking identifier. The reason why file 1 and 2 were able to stitch together is because they both had this ID of 1. But we actually didn't have the emails at all. They didn't really help at all. So this is a really nice way to be able to consolidate data without having to kind of, is this an inner join? Do I have to write Python or things like this? So now if we head over, we've got these nice 10 records. And obviously, this is the thing that we want to drive into the Copilot. Not the 4 input files. We want to drive this in. So what I've done for this is I've set up what we call export targets. Export targets are a way to say, where do I go after CluedIn? Right, where do I go after we've done some of this consolidation? And of course, being a Fabric conference, we support OneLake. We do AWS Gen 2. In my case, I've just connected to a SQL Server database. And that is running locally here. And this is one of those beautiful ways to see that looks like we're good. But actually, when you zoom in, you realize this is the reality of us breaking down the job titles we have. So if you're an engineer in the room, this is actually quite hard to solve from an engineering perspective. And it's hard to maintain because someone will always be creative. A new way to represent a job title. And this is the same, bless you. This is the same with company names, cities, countries, all of these things. So let's go and fix this. So now I've got my employees, and at least I've got 10. I don't have 30. We're going to filter by our employees, and then we're going to launch into a cleaning studio. We're going to call this Fix Job Titles. In this, we need to specify what properties we're wanting to clean, so it's just automatically loaded all of them. And then a data steward can go and launch into this stewarding environment, and it'll help them figure out what the problem is, and it'll also kind of suggest what they think the fix is as well. So we don't want them to have to write weird code, functions, Power Effects, Power Query, and things like this. We have to remember the end user of this is going to be someone who is an expert in HR. They know our employees. They know what departments we have, what lines of business. They know to spot when there's something missing there. So we're going to launch into this, and we're going to go ahead, and we're going to just take the drop-down functionality here. This is going to give us a distribution of all the different values we have. You can imagine if this is 10,000 values, you won't find them, right? If this is 1 million variations, you're not going to find them. And so what you can do is you can launch into this clustering feature, and it will go off and start to make these types of suggestions. I think all of these bad spellings of accounting should be this. What do you think? So obviously I would say, yep, you're right there. Yes, you are right there. And as you cycle through the different techniques, they'll all pick up different variations, things like abbreviations, things like, phonetic differences, things like diacritic character differences, and things like this. So I think software developer seems like the one we want to choose. So we're going to close this off, and our data distribution looks a little bit better. Before we do anything, let's actually get the current employees out. And this is really speaking to that idea of we don't need to clean everything and fix everything before anyone gets any value. So for this, I'm going to create a stream in CluedIn. We're going to call this employees. Here we need to specify what type of data we're actually wanting to share. I'm going to choose something a little bit high level that says, I'm just interested in sharing all of those employees that we onboarded. Notice we're not talking about files anymore. We're not talking about CSV files anymore. We've moved beyond that. We're now moving closer to the right, which is closer to the business, closer to business domains. Next, we need to specify where we actually want to send it. So let's send it to that database. And I'm going to create a table called clean employees. Here, I'm also finally going to specify, well, what properties do we want to kick out. I'm mainly interested in the job title right now, but we're just going to push everything out. And we're going to start up this live stream of data. We can get a little bit of a preview here. This is exactly the data that we're going to send out, and we're going to send it out even with this horrible data quality here, okay? The reason why is, at least we've got a single list of our employees. Why would we block that from getting out, even if, you know, you're always going to have data quality issues? So if I head over to Power BI, I'm going to remove this data set that it's looking at, and we're going to hook this up to our database, okay? So our SQL Server. There should be a table here waiting for me called clean employees. There is. Direct query is fine. And I'm just going to patch my chart with the fields coming from this. Click on this guy, patch that guy, and great, we're back to nothing. We haven't fixed anything. I've got an auto page refresh set up on this guy, so this guy refreshes every 1 second, right? So in a way, simulating some type of stream. We're going to go back. Our cleaning project, we fix these values. So I'm going to go back, open this cleaning project, and I'm going to push my changes in. This is going to do a couple of things. Number one, what I actually told it to do is kind of very deterministic. I said, if you spell software developer like that, turn it into that. If you spell accounting like that, turn it into that. Now, I wouldn't want to manually create these rules. I would want the engine to do this for me. So let's go ahead and confirm. This will also naturally change the records in the MDM platform, right? So if we head over while this is processing, just a few seconds ago, it created these rules. If I go and take a look at one of these rules, it's kind of easy to understand. It says, where I ever see a job title that equals this bad spelling of accounting, or this one, or this one, or this one, I actually have a known action, which is to turn it back into this beautiful version of accounting. And effectively what you're doing here is you're patching those particular problems from ever happening again. If I have time, I'll also show you how you can patch it in a way where you don't always have to come back and add a new variation and clean it every week as people are getting more creative. But let's see if we have enough time for that. So the other thing that it's done is if I head over to my Power BI, and let's just refresh this guy. You look better. So now we're delivering a list of employees. We have cleaned the data. There might be more things that we need to do with this eventually, but this is the file I want to be putting into my Copilot. Naturally, we're spitting this out to a SQL server, but as I showed you before, this could also easily be targets for one lake. Why is this important? Because Microsoft Purview is the thing that is actively scanning the estate. So it would need to be scanning the output of where CluedIn is actually putting its data out to. And that could be one lake, it could be ADLS Gen 2, it could be SQL Server or Azure SQL Server. But just for this demonstration, I've just added a local instance of SQL Server here. So pretty quickly, we've been able to onboard the employee data, we've been able to clean it, and now we've been able to spit it out into the ecosystem. So obviously now, when I'm in Azure AI Studio, and I get to choose from where do I want to pull my data in from, well, I want to be pulling in a file called clean employees, right? So we've kind of shown how we've done the consolidation, the cleaning, etc. I think I have enough time to show you how to patch more data coming through with issues. So you can imagine now you've at least protected from a couple of these examples of fancy and people being creative with their spelling of their job titles. Depending on the amount of data, you might find there's 400 new versions every day. How am I going to keep up with this? So if I head over to the rule builder in CluedIn, this is where some of those rules were automatically created. One of the options I have here is to build a rule, and we're going to say use an LLM to clean data. Here I specify exactly what records I'm wanting to clean. So I'm going to keep this very high level. I'm going to say where the type of data is equal to an employee. That's not how you spell employee, by the way. The system's not that smart. So here, I'm going to save this guy. And my action is, this is okay, what am I going to do on those records? Well, I want to call some LLM. In here, let's go and use this action here, which is set the value with AI. And what we could do is we could say employee.job. I want to hand that into the large language model. And the result, I actually want to save back to the employee.job property. So give in the bad value and give me back the good one. Here is where we specify what large language model we want to use. And this is hooked up to Azure AI Studio and Azure OpenAI. So you can use any of the models in either of those. I'm going to be a bit risque, and I'm going to use the worst possible model available, which is GPT-3. It's also one of the cheapest. It's called Da Vinci. Here is where the magic happens, this part here. Because this is the prompt we want to use to automate these things. So I would imagine I would want to write something like, given the job title of blah, can you standardize, you could tell I'm Australian, it's the S's, not the Z's, the job title and expand abbreviations and make it title case, and then just return the name of the clean job title. Now, you might not get this prompt right first time. You might need to iterate on it. So once I've got something like this, I can now run this in bulk against all of my data records. So this is the equivalent of doing something like this. I missed something out there, but I'll fill that in now. So what I needed to do was inject my token, so something like this. So this is going to run against the data in bulk, and what it'll do is every record it'll look at its employee job, and it'll replace it with something like this. Software developer, something like this. And naturally what we're wanting to bring back is, please bring back software developer. Don't be chatty about it. I just want the value software developer. Hence, me putting at the end there, just return the clean job title name. We go off here, software developer. So you can see how we can even start to handle these things we haven't seen before, but naturally it could get things wrong, right? There's nothing deterministic about this. This is more heuristic. It's using a model. So we've got the nice combination of using both, the deterministic ones and the heuristic ones as well. So this is a Fabric conference, and I've just shown you what's in it for the business users, but I can imagine some of you are also engineers and looking at Fabric and Azure Databricks and Synapse and things like this. What's in it for you? Well, you can actually, from your notebooks, interact with CluedIn through a Python library. You can authenticate with it, and of course you can do things like load me the employees into my data frame. Write back from a data frame to CluedIn. So, with that in mind, we now have a way to be able to kind of plumb in some of the governance pieces with Purview. We have some of the ways to plumb in some of the data quality pieces, and most importantly, we're making the business responsible for this. So then what does the Copilot look like when we feed this data in instead? Let's take those same 4 control questions. What is Martin's contact detail? Well, now we have 1 phone number coming back. Okay? Let's ask about Martin's salary. Because we have used the system messages Because using something like Purview, which has the ability to classify documents, we can catch that early in the pipeline and not even get that data into the custom copilots. Finally, because we've also put the context into the copilots with the system messages, it's much more aware when I'm asking for the cultural values, who are we talking about in this context? So it's able to find the employee handbooks and get the context for delivering the cultural values out there. And then finally, when we're asking about the 10 examples of how to lower cost, the answer is coming back, and it's very obvious it has been looking at our custom data. It even starts to mention some of the assets that it used, and we get that through Azure AI Studio. It also makes it very abundantly clear to any of those who were an employee, these are definitely tools that we have used in the past and probably don't use anymore. It's much more abundantly clear this has actually made an answer based off our data. So data governance, I would say, has always been kind of felt as one of those things that we kind of have to do, and much more on the defensive side. And one of the things I hope has become abundantly clear here is that there's very offensive elements to data governance as well. I mean, just by putting some of these things in the supply chain of data, you are looking at getting better ways of getting lineage, audit trails, of course, clean data, things like deduplication, golden records. I don't want 3 Lorraines, I want 1 Lorraine. All backed by workflow, etc. So what's pretty powerful here is, because Azure AI Studio, it gave us that hook. It said, this file was used in the actual response to your prompt. That hook, when you start to combine it with Purview, which is scanning the lineage at the asset level, and CluedIn, which is scanning the lineage at the record level, you can start to apply that metadata over any response that comes back. So for example, in this example, we would have put a system message in that says, oh, by the way, whenever you answer any response, please make sure you also put the metadata over the top for who is the steward and who's the responsible person from that data product in Purview. Stitching this together yields a much better experience in things like a Copilot. For those of you who aren't aware of Purview, this is the kind of lineage that we will build up. Part of this lineage has actually been built by the CluedIn platform when we mapped those employee files into the concept of employee. That's being written into the actual Purview lineage. We can go take a look at an individual record, so we can always get a link back to that. And we get that full audit trail that says the who, what, the where, the why, i.e. who changed what, when, in what system. These are some of the things we need to be able to build some level of trust and attribution in using these end copilots. We also get, in Microsoft Purview, the data quality metrics being generated at the asset level. That's fantastic. Where CluedIn takes over is more, I'll give you those at the record level. So we get the data quality at the record level granularity, and Microsoft Purview gives us that at the asset level, meaning tables, files, and things like this. And this is all backed by probably a very familiar looking workflow engine if you are a user of Power Automate and the Power Platform for building all of your workflows of approval, making changes to cleaning data. I mean, we would obviously not want engineers just to write directly from their notebooks back in. This is all backed by workflow that you can have people responsible for to be able to approve some of these things. And of course, because this is actually Power Automate that's embedded, this is how you build your workflows inside of CluedIn, you get all the luxury of all the connectors. Jira, ServiceNow, all of these different ways to be able to connect to service desk systems or Slack, Teams, email. So you can build up these potentially elaborate workflows that are necessary. So for this, I hope one thing that's become kind of abundantly clear is that there seems to be this kind of new era of data governance coming in. And one of the key aspects is a real focus on the offensive elements of data governance. The things that are how do we productize data in a well-governed way? How do we make this data more valuable and get more value out of data? I would argue our employee data is more valuable now. It's easier to link, it's easier to blend, it's easier to just pick up and start generating insights like a Power BI chart. And you can imagine if we let that data out the door and someone sees that pie chart and it looks great until we look into the details, that's where that lack of trust comes. So really data governance is about adding those extra pillars of trust so we can actually start to use our data. And like I alluded to at the start of the session, the Copilot experience, it makes it so abundantly clear very quickly if you've got data quality issues. It makes it stick out like a sore thumb. And I think to some degree, we've got such high expectations of the use of a Copilot. And without those pillars of data governance and data quality and master data management, you can kind of see the examples of what would happen. So with that, guys, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And I'll mention one last thing. We are actually giving this platform to everyone here. So the first 10,000 records are on us. And this is with all the Copilot, with everything you just saw there, with the cleaning studio. And the fact is, that's a great way to get started. Because in MDM and data quality, you'll always want to start small. So taking a domain that falls under that 10,000 records, for you that might be employees, it might be products, it might be customers, it might be inventory or materials. I think this really lowers the entry barrier in the Microsoft ecosystem to be able to bring the business into the supply chain and start to fix some of the problems that I've shown you here. So thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.